Here we are in the last chapter of How to Debate the So-Called Salafiyah. Reciting at the graves. Those mean people, those Wahhabis, also forbid the Muslims from reciting Qur'an over the graves of their dead. They have nothing to substantiate this but their callousness and dry character. May Allah deform their faces. Let us give brief yet ample clarification of its being a religious recommendation. You know, if you have some experience with Wahhabis at a gravesite, then they're going to tell you, turn away from the grave to make dua, because they're afraid you're going to worship the dead person. That's what they think about Muslims, that Muslims are grave worshippers. If you were to ask them, why turn away from the grave? They'll say, so you don't worship the dead person. So you say to him, which way should we turn? He'll say, turn towards the Kaaba. Tell him, why? Would I be worshiping the Kaaba if I face the Kaaba? So he'll say, no. Tell him, then what make you think I'll worship the dead person if I was facing the dead person? And he shouldn't have any answer there, except if he wants to be straightforward about his ill thought of you, that you would worship someone other than Allah. Ahlul Sunnah have a consensus that the dead benefit from the supplication of the living. And the dead benefit from the charities of the living given on behalf of the dead. And Nasafi, may Allah have mercy upon him, and Nasafi, the theologian, he said in his famous document about the Muslim creed, وَفِي دُعَاءِ الْأَحْيَاءِ لِلْأَمْوَاتِ وَصَدَقَتِهِمْ عَنْهُمْ نَفْعٌ لَهُمْ. And the supplication of the living for the dead and their charity on their behalf is benefit for the dead, yani, is beneficial. Well, in it there is, in the supplication of the living is benefit for the dead, and in their charity on their behalf. What if a Wahhabi said, well, what's the problem with facing the Kaaba and turning away from the grave? You have a problem with turning away from the grave? You can say, I don't have any problem with turning away from the grave. It's not, the issue is not that. The issue is why you have a problem with somebody's making dua while he's facing the grave. So maybe you'll say, why would you make dua facing the grave? You might say, because that's the way I was already facing. We were burying this dead person. Here we are standing all around his grave, filling his grave in, remembering our dead person, and remembering Allah Ta'ala, yani, eulogizing our dead person, giving the rights to the dead Muslim here. We're not just standing here with our backs to his grave. We didn't come out here and turn our backs to his grave the whole time. So we're just here, and this is the funeral here, and his family's here, and his friends and loved ones are here, his community's here, and we are burying him. We put the dirt there, and now the dirt is over his grave, and now we're going to raise our hands and make dua. You're the only person who thought somebody is even worshiping the dead person. As Suyuti said in the explanation of As-Sudur, as for reciting the Qur'an at the grave, our scholars and colleagues, as well as others, yani scholars of other schools, are definitive of its religious legitimacy. As Za'farani said, I asked Ash-Shafi'i about reciting at the grave, and he said there is no problem with it. And Nawawi said in the explanation of Al-Muhadhab, it is recommended for the one who visits the graves to recite what is easy for him of the Qur'an. Yani, recite something of the Qur'an that's easy for him, and then when he feels like he wants to stop, he stops. And to supplicate for him afterwards. Ash-Shafi'i explicitly mentioned this. And the mujtahids within the Shafi'i school have agreed upon it. And Nawawi added in another place, if he completes the recitation of the entire Qur'an, that would be even better. It is mutawatir that Ash-Shafi'i visited the grave of Al-Layth ibn Sa'd and praised him a lot and recited the Qur'an from the beginning to the end there, and said, I hope that this will continue. And it persisted. Al-Qurtubi said, some of our scholars have used the hadith of the moist stick as evidence for recitation of the Qur'an over the grave. The one when the Prophet ﷺ broke the stick into two pieces, then planted a half into one grave and a half into another. And then he said, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, لَعَلَّهُ يُخَفَّفُ عَنْهُمَا مَا لَمْ يَيْبَسَا. It is so that the torture will be lightened for them as long as the sticks did not dry. That is narrated by the two sheikhs, Al-Bukhari and Muslim. This is still An-Nawawi talking. This promotes the legitimacy of planting trees on the graves. Trees here means plants. Plants doesn't mean necessarily a big tree that grows. This promotes the legitimacy of planting trees on the graves and reciting the Qur'an. For if it is lightened for them by the plants, if the torture is lightened for them by the plants, then how about by the Qur'an recitation of a believing person? That's even greater. A believer's recitation of the Qur'an is greater than a stick's dhikr. And Nawawi said, the scholars have recommended the recitation of the Qur'an at the grave, and they considered it good by the hadith of the two sticks. They said that if the benefit reached the dead by the tasbih of the sticks, the dhikr of sticks, the sticks saying Subhanallah, while they were moist, as long as those sticks are moist, while they are moist, then for the dead to benefit from the recitation of the Qur'an at the grave is even more so valid, because the recitation of the Qur'an from a person is greater and more beneficial than the tasbih of a stick. That's called qiyas, it's comparison. Among what testifies to the dead benefiting from the recitation of the Qur'an is the hadith of Ma'qil ibn Yassar, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Iqra'u ala mawtakum," recite on your dead or over your dead. Abu Dawood narrated it. There is also the hadith, "Iqra'u Yasin ala mawtakum," recite Yasin over your dead. This is narrated by An-Nasa'i, Ibn Majah, and Ibn Hibban. There is also the hadith, Yasin qalbul Qur'an. Yasin is the heart of the Qur'an. لا يقرأها رجل يريد الله والدار الآخرة إلا غفر له. No man who wants the reward from Allah and the pleasure of the afterlife recites it, except that he would be forgiven. فَقْرَؤُوهَا عَلَى مَوْتَاكُمْ. So recite it over your dead. Ahmed narrated it. Question: what if he says that some of the Tabi'un explained these to be about the one who's dying? If a Wahhabi said, La, these hadiths, they don't mean what you say. Some of the Tabi'un said that this means recite over your dying people. Some of the followers of the companions have interpreted the mawta, the dead, here in these hadiths, as muhtabar, the one who's on his deathbed. But this non-literal inference is against the apparent meaning of the hadith. It doesn't seem to be that that's what the hadith is saying. This is a ta'wil for the hadith, because the wording of the hadith is not muhtabar, the one who's on his deathbed. It's mawta, the dead ones. And there's no need to make such an inference, to make such a ta'wil, to take this non-literal interpretation is not necessary. Why? Why explain these hadiths as meaning those who are dying, as opposed to explaining the hadith as per its wording. Those who have died, al-mawta, there is no need to make such an inference. So we're not going to take this ta'wil. So what if a Wahhabi says, you think you know better than the Tabi'un? We'll say, no, I don't think I know better than the Tabi'un. But the scholars said here and in other places, there's a rule, really. There's a broader rule, not just for this case, which is whenever it's possible to take the Qur'an or the hadith by face value, at face value, whenever that's possible, that's better. In fact, it's not permissible to explain the Qur'an and the hadith by other than what appears without an evidence to do so. What's the evidence to explain this by other than what appears? Not to mention that you, Wahhabi, you give us a hard time all the time about making ta'wil. We just spent more than half the book refuting you about ta'wil. Now you have a hadith, you want to insist on a ta'wil. Furthermore, it would be said that if the one on his deathbed benefits from the recitation of Yasin, although this recitation is not from his own deeds, not one of his own deeds, then the dead person would likewise benefit because the dead person is like that present living person. He hears like the present living person, as confirmed in the hadith. And the Prophet told us, alayhi salatu wassalam, that breaking the bone of the dead person is like breaking it when he's alive. What we learned, by the way, quick benefit here, that when you give the dead a ghusl, better to use cool water, not warm water. Because cool water or cold water slows the decay. I've been in the presence of some brothers when they take care of the dead Muslim, they want to give him a ghusl with warm water. They say, because he can feel it. So it's true that he can feel. But according to what we learned, in the fiqh that we learned, cool water is better. It was narrated from Ali ibn Musa al-Haddad that he said, I was with Ahmad ibn Hanbal in a funeral, and Muhammad ibn Qudamah al-Jawhari was with us. When the dead was buried, a blind man came to the grave, and Ahmad said, hey you, certainly reciting at the grave is an innovation. When we left from the graves, Muhammad ibn Qudamah said to Imam Ahmad, oh Aba Abdullah, what do you say about Mubashir ibn Ismail al-Halabi? Ahmad said, Fiqh, he's trustworthy. Have you copied anything from his route? Muhammad ibn Qudamah said, yes. Mubashir ibn Ismail informed me from Abdul Rahman ibn Ala, the son of Al-Lajlaj, from his father, that he made a will that when he is buried, the beginning and end of Al-Baqarah should be recited at his grave. And I heard Ibn Umar making the same will. So those are companions. They made a will that Qur'an would be recited on their graves or over their graves. Then Ahmed said, go back to the man and tell him to recite. Yani he's saying, catch him. I retract what I just said. Catch him and tell him to go back and recite. This is how Al-Qurtubi narrated it in his book, At-Tadhkirah, and Allah knows best. That's the end of that section there. The Wahhabis don't have any religious proof to stop the Muslims from reciting over the graves and to forbid them from facing the graves when they recite. They'll have a proof to forbid them from that. It's not obligatory to face the Qibla when you make dua. What I'm saying here is not to tell you, face the grave when you recite. That's not the meaning of what I'm saying. Whatever way you are facing, there's no problem. The only time it's obligatory to face the Kaaba is when you're in your prayer. The scholar said facing the Kaaba is an obligation only for prayer, not for anything else. So when you're at your house, in your own house, making dua, you're going to make dua whatever way you're facing. Or you might turn and face the Kaaba, the Qibla yani. You might, or you might not. You don't have to. You can, and you don't have to. If you were at the grave and you turned and faced the Qibla to recite, there's no problem there. The problem is being a meanie and uh, accusing the Muslims of paganism. Conclusion. Perhaps this is more than sufficient, meaning all of what we read in the book, perhaps is more than sufficient. Really, all of the proofs that we went over in the book, that's enough for you for the vast majority of anything that a Wahhabi can bring to you. And if you know what's in the book very well, then probably it's enough for you for anything a Wahhabi will bring for you. Because there's spots in the book that we even said, the answers that are given here will be sufficient for you if a Wahhabi gives you some other texts that we haven't mentioned here. There would be a chapter, a case, a point, and we'll talk about the proofs there and how to refute a Wahhabi. And then we'd say, and there are still other references a Wahhabi might bring you, but what's here is enough for you. So it means if you just understand the proof and how it works, if you understand the case and how the proof works, then even if the Wahhabi is bringing something that's not in this book mentioned, you still can answer him. And maybe there's a slim chance he might bring up something that the book doesn't have an answer for. But many Wahhabis, a number of them, subhanallah wa bihamdihi, they read this book and they changed. And more than one of them contacted me personally about that. And other people contacted me about that, telling me about Wahhabis changing their conviction from this book. Subhanallah wa bihamdi. You said, isn't the Qibla for the dua is the heavens? Yes, with the meaning of raising your hands. Yes, with that meaning of raising your hands. So perhaps this is more than sufficient. If we can refute their understanding of the aforementioned texts, all of whatever we have covered here in the book, then any others they use can also be explained. So do not be surprised if one of them says that Allah is behind a veil. We didn't address such a hadith in the book. Or Allah comes to the slave running and jogging. It's another hadith we didn't address in the book. Or if they attribute feelings and emotions to Allah. So plenty of things they might bring that we didn't address in the book. But here, just to cover it, his mahabbah is his granting a slave greatness. Someone might translate that as love. It's not the emotion of love. And his bughd is his making the slave despicable, not the feeling of hatred. And his ghadab is his will to punish, not the feeling of anger. Yani these are not emotions. So we don't have detailed arguments here in the book for these cases. But what we have is enough to refute a Wahhabi. This handbook complies with the verse. كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. You are the best nation ever sent out to the people. You bid the good, forbid the evil, and believe in Allah. We thank Allah for the blessings that He gave without being obligated to give anything, for enabling us to know who these wicked people are, and for granting us the ability to refute them. There are many Muslims who don't know who the Wahhabis are, but awareness of the Wahhabis has spread a lot, and that's in great part to our Shaykh rahimahullah ta'ala. But not only him. I saw some people saying no one can refute Wahhabis like the followers of Sheikh Abdullah. And we thank Allah for granting us the ability to refute them. Some people, they can't refute Wahhabis. They know who they are, but they don't have the knowledge or the tactics to refute them. So that's a mercy from Allah that He gave us. We ask Allah to enable us and them to see the truth as truth so that we may abide by it, and to see the evil as evil so that we may avoid it. We ask Him to grant us and them the correct belief and a straight understanding of it. We ask Him to make us die with true, correct belief, and that we escape His torture. We ask Allah to grant us the lawful sustenance. May Allah make this booklet convincing and make its arguments flawless. And we ask Allah to make this booklet beneficial in life and after death. And we ask Allah to forgive whoever worked on it, spread it, taught it, read it, or was delighted by it. May He make it a shield and a weapon for the Muslims and make it weighty on the scales of justice on the Day of Judgment. I'm very hopeful, inshallah, about this book that maybe Allah will spare me on Judgment Day. Oh Allah, we ask you by the merit and honor of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to answer this humble supplication and to guide those Wahhabis or destroy them. Ameen. And Allah knows best. So that's the last chapter. And now we just have our table of questions. But I don't want to start the table of questions today. I want to start the table of questions next week, if Allah gives us the life, so that we can start from the top of the hour from the first question, inshallah. So we'll stop here.